Chapter 23. "The transponder's signal's coming in fine," Doheny said, as he swung the radio locator in a narrow arc. "Now let's hope Nina put it in the right place." Behind him, the other 3 men of the pickup squad were unloading the metal mesh basket that was supposed to hold the dead alien. The copter had set down in the crater. It was the closest thing to clear terrain anywhere in the area. "Over that way," Doheny said, pointing. "Come on, then," Johnson barked. Together, the 4 men pushed their way through the jungle, hauling the basket between them. The chopper waited, engine idling. The general had said to keep the engine running, to be ready to run at any moment. The aliens might be coming to make the pickup themselves. No one knew if they cared about their dead in the same way people did, but judging by the bomb the first one had used, there was something they didn't want to leave lying around. Bodies, equipment, something. Doheny knew all that. He'd been working with Philip's group for years, and he knew the aliens were supposed to be very real and very deadly, but somehow, deep down, he didn't quite believe it. Intellectually, sure, the aliens were real, but emotionally the idea just hadn't sunk in. He swung his machete. The briefings had said they'd be safer unarmed, but he'd insisted they needed to be able to clear the way to get the basket through, and there might be more mundane menaces than the killer aliens around here. Besides the machete, Doheny had his sidearm, as did the others. Phillips advised against it, but Phillips wasn't out here in the jungle with the snakes and vines. When the 4 men reached the cliff edge, Romano, holding one of the front corners, almost went over before he caught himself. Johnson swore at him. Doheny looked over the edge and spotted the creature almost immediately, lying at the bottom, 30 yards off to the right, draped across a fallen tree with a 5-foot limb stuck through its chest. "Shit," he said quietly. It was real. And it was going to be a royal son of a bitch to get it off that chunk of wood and into the basket. And there was no way in hell they were going to haul it up the cliff by hand, through all that brush. They'd have to rig a harness, get the chopper over with a line and a hook, and hoist it up. At least with the river right, they'd be able to get a hook down without snagging in the canopy. "Come on," he said, starting the climb down the precipice. "Let's get on with it." Reluctantly, the others followed, tipping the basket up and sliding it carefully over the edge in a controlled fall. Doheny was halfway down when he glanced over at where the dead alien lay, and froze. He blinked, hoping it was some sort of illusion, maybe some kind of refraction caused by spray from the river, something that would disappear. It didn't disappear. "Shit," he said, again. Johnson, Romano, and Sturgill glanced at him, saw where he was staring, and turned their own gaze. All 4 men froze, staring. There were 4 of the things. 5, counting the dead one. The 4 of them were standing in a circle around their fallen comrade. Then one of them looked over at the men, hanging there halfway down the cliff. Johnson let go of his hold on the basket and began climbing upward. "Go," he called. "Get out of here! Back to the chopper!" Sturgill, caught by surprise by the sudden increase in weight when Johnson released his share, slid several feet farther down before he was able to free himself of the basket. The basket crashed downward past him, tearing through leaves, flipping end for end every time it hit an obstruction, until finally it landed with a splash, half on the bank, half in the river. Sturgill hung for a moment, making sure his hold was solid. Then he turned to find that Johnson and Romano had already scrambled halfway back up. Doheny was waiting for him, though. "You okay?" Doheny called. Sturgill nodded. He glanced over at the enemy, then blinked. "They're gone," he said. Doheny looked, startled. Sturgill was right. The 4 live aliens had vanished. Had they imagined it then? Had the creatures been an illusion of some kind? No, that was nonsense. All 4 men had seen them there. Johnson and Romano wouldn't be fleeing in panic otherwise. They'd seen something. So where had the 4 creatures gone? Doheny hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen any movement, just suddenly they were gone. Could they be that fast, that silent? He remembered the briefings. Yes, They were that fast, that silent. Doheny had discounted it when he'd first heard the story. Had figured that the lone survivor from 8 years ago had dressed up his account to make himself look good. But now, very suddenly, Doheny believed it all. They were fast, strong, silent. They could move through the jungle as well as anything on Earth. And they had their invisibility screens too. And they killed people, just for fun. "Oh God," Doheny whispered as he scrambled upward. He dropped his machete. He was glad of that now. He wondered if it was too late to ditch his pistol and decided not to worry about it. If he could reach the chopper, he'd be safe. They couldn't catch that, no matter how fast or how strong they were. They didn't have wings and they couldn't fly. At the top, he turned to see if he could lend Sturgill a hand. Johnson and Romano were already running through the jungle, smashing through the undergrowth, making enough noise to wake the dead, sending birds and insects flying in all directions as they ran for the crater and their ride out. Sturgill wasn't there. Doheny had thought that Sturgill was right behind him. He leaned over and peered down. Sturgill was almost at the bottom, he saw, down by the abandoned basket. He must have slipped again. He wasn't moving. Was he hurt? Panicky, Doheny threw a glance at the dead alien. There was no sign of the live ones. He looked back down at Sturgill and realized that the red he saw down there all around the fallen man wasn't part of the jungle. It wasn't flowers or insects or butterflies. That was Sturgill's blood. Sturgill was already dead. The things had gotten him. "Oh shit," Doheny said as he turned and ran for the copter. About halfway to the crater, he almost tripped over Romano, or what was left of him. Doheny recognized him by his size and his gear, not by his features. Romano's head was gone. "Oh, Jesus!" Doheny cried, stumbling on. Johnson had made it as far as the edge of the crater. He lay on his back, his chest ripped open. Doheny hardly glanced at him. The chopper was there, waiting, hovering a few feet off the ground. The pilot must have seen Johnson die, and he'd gotten moving, gotten off the ground. But he was staying low, staying in reach, waiting for the others. A brave man, Doheny thought gratefully. And there was the co-pilot, Jim Wyatt, leaning out the door shouting something. Doheny couldn't make out what. He ran down the slope, stumbling on vines, and when he was closer, he heard Wyatt call, "Where the fuck are the others? They coming?" "Dead!" Doheny shouted back. "They're all dead, back there!" "Come on then!" Wyatt called, holding out a hand, and Doheny ran, getting ready to jump, to grab Wyatt's arm and be pulled aboard. And that was when the blades slashed through his side. He couldn't run anymore. He wasn't dead, but the pain in his side was too much. He could feel hot blood spilling down his leg and his side and was suddenly icy cold despite the jungle heat. He couldn't make his legs work. He folded up and fell. He saw Wyatt hesitating, saw him inch forward. He was obviously thinking about jumping down to help, but he wasn't sure he should. And just then the pilot's nerve finally broke, before Wyatt could move any farther. The chopper began to rise, to pull away from the earth. And Doheny knew they were leaving him behind, leaving him to die, to become another grisly trophy for the aliens. And he began to cry, his eyes filling with tears, his breath coming in gasps. He was bleeding to death. He knew he was bleeding to death, and they were abandoning him to save their own worthless lives. And he hated them with a sudden intensity he hadn't known possible. For an instant, he was almost glad when the blue-white fireball hit the chopper's fuel tank and the craft blossomed into an orange inferno before plummeting back to Earth. He could hear Wyatt scream, saw Wyatt try to dive free of the wreckage, his uniform already burning. And then something grabbed him by the hair and lifted him up, and a ragged blade flashed, and Doheny was dead. Miles away, a radio man reported, "General, we've lost the chopper." "Damn," Phillips glared. "What happened?" "I don't know, sir. The pilot didn't have time to say much. The transponder's out, though. It's gone." "Find out. No, Forget that. I know what happened. The aliens, of course. The monsters from outer space had been displeased that humans had been poking around their dead comrade. Any chance of giving them the body as a goodwill gesture was gone. Any chance of getting a look at the technology on that body was gone. And 6 good men were gone too. "Should I send a rescue mission to look for survivors, sir?" Perkins asked. Phillips turned, startled. "Hell no," he said. "There aren't any survivors." "According to the radio reports, the pickup crew wasn't on board when the chopper went down, sir. They were probably already dead," Phillips said. "But, alright, look," Phillips said. "If they're on the ground, they'll be okay for a while. We'll go in and look after those things have had time to finish up and leave. But I'm not sending more men in to be slaughtered." "Yes, sir," Perkins reluctantly agreed. The general saw his face, knew that Perkins thought that they should at least try to rescue the pickup crew. Phillips knew better. Maybe Schaefer had managed to kill one of the aliens. Maybe Dutch had managed to kill one. But the men of the pickup crew had been ordinary mortals. And they'd been armed. Phillips wished he had ordered them to go in unarmed. Maybe then the aliens would have let them go. But maybe they wouldn't have. This wasn't a hunt. This was defending the dead. The rules might be different. And besides, he'd wanted volunteers. And if he'd insisted on no weapons, he might not have got any. That might have been better all round, of course, because despite what Perkins might think, Phillips knew those men were dead. Well, there was still Schaefer and his guide, and Phillips intended at least to get to him before the aliens could.